Welcome back to the Student Hub Live event for the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. In this session, we're going to look at heritage in war. And I'm joined by Sean Cordell, who's here to talk about a project that his colleague, Derek Matravis, who we've just seen on the video, is working on. What's the project all about?
Okay, so heritage in war concerns artefacts, objects. So rather than just, but rather than people and combatants and military personnel and civilians in war, this concerns like stuff, things, and it concerns cultural artifacts, right? Objects of cultural significance, of historical significance, works of art, libraries, buildings, or whatever. And the interesting question that driven the project, as Derek said on the video, is that theories about justice of war, which are long established, have primarily or exclusively concerned people. So the value of human life and when it is or may be permissible to take human life in war. I mean, there are two main areas of just war theory, as it's known. One is the justice of actually starting wars, and another section is what you can or can't do when you're in a war. It's the second kind of area that I think this project is concerned with, and it's concerned with, well, you know, when is it justifiable, if ever, to destroy cultural artifacts, objects of great significance? What's driving, that's the question that's driving the project, and also behind it is the fact that the British military is actually, or Britain has actually adopted the 1954 Hague Convention, as Derek said, which actually recognises cultural artifacts and cultural heritage in this way in war. So it can be a war crime to destroy cultural heritage, and this is very important. And the British Army right now has got a working group on implementing this policy and what it means, and this project actually directly feeds into that. They're working with various partners, with British Army, with NATO, with Norwegian military, on just these questions. Right.
So this is a very large project which has got people like the British Museum, legal professionals, NATO, obviously Derek and various sort of academic colleagues all working on it. And ultimately at the heart of it is it's about the value of these works of art and the question about how valuable they are. Yeah. There's some ranking going on here. Obviously, sort of, we've got lives, but also these artefacts. The other thing that I wanted to pick up on is that, you know, you mentioned the 1954 Hague Convention, and the UK government has now just ratified. Yeah. That was a long time ago. That was when Sean's older technology was invented. So why has this taken so long? And what is the significance then of signing up to this?
That's the question of why it's taken so long. I'm out of my depth there. I mean, that's the question for that's the question for successive British governments.
They've got enough on their plate.
And the United Nations and all the rest of it. As for significance, as I said, I think it's really interesting that they're now, military agencies and so on have to think about what they do and what they can and can't do, or should or shouldn't do, in a slightly different way, and think about the sense that these objects might matter, not just, well, which lives are we talking about, but these objects. So that seems really interesting in terms of how it's actually going to play out in actual practice and policy, as it were, and how military units, armies, and might conduct themselves.
I mean, it can make war very challenging because, you know, all of these rules and regulations will determine what you can blow up and what you can't.
Basically, yeah.
But on a serious level, you know, the point of it is something quite important, because we're preserving artefacts. To some extent, there is this question then, at what cost? Right.
Well, that's just where it's such a, you know, it might sound like, well, here's a project to work out what armies can and can't do, or should and shouldn't do, but this is why it's such an interesting, exciting philosophical project. And it's really kind of because questions there, some of which Derek touched on, is so one is about proportionality. So in theories about justice in war, what can and can't be done, what constitutes war crimes. There's a question of proportionality, you know, whether an act of retaliation or defence is proportional to the threat, and so on. Now it seems like, well, if we take into account objects of cultural significance and museums and great works of art and statues and so on, they get weighed in as well, or could be weighed in the proportionality. And then the question is, well, how do we do that? Why? How valuable are they in comparison or weighed in with human lives? And also, right down to the basics. Well, why are they valuable? You know, I suppose a skeptic might say, well, yeah, oh, lovely, but they're lumps of concrete or whatever they are in the end of the day. And, you know, we're comparing that the values aren't commensurable, to use a highfalutin philosophical term. They're two different sorts of things, one might say. Well, in this actual policy, the policy says no, they're not. In the sense, they are being valued with each other in war. So how do we value them and why? Is the question, or one question.
I mean, there are three key research questions which I think are really, really interesting. In what circumstances may we intentionally or foreseeably damage cultural sites of property? What, if anything, ought we to do to protect that cultural property? In what zones and at what cost? And what is the appropriate response to damaged sites of cultural property? And of course, the issue with criminalising anything is that there are consequences.
That's right. But I mean, the interesting issue there is it seems that it might be the case that it's justified to take life, it may be, to take life, foreseeably anyway, in defence of some stuff, a cultural site or whatever. So you might fight. It might be justified to fight for the defence, to defend things that are very valuable that aren't humans, and in doing so, humans might get killed. Now that's quite, I mean, some people might just be brought up smart by that and think, that can't be right, you know, human lives above all. But then we think of, as again Derek mentioned, the events in Palmyra when ISIS were destroying, you know, quite intentionally, as an act of war, it seems to be an act of war, destroying sites of great cultural heritage. And you know, was it appropriate to try and defend them? Perhaps it was. And certainly, that seems right as well. You know, there seems to be a case for defending those. Why defend them? And as I say, how we explain that value and how valuable they are is the kind of questions the project gets into. And also, who says and whose property are they? Because there's a question of does it? You know, nobody owns them anymore as such. You know, they're ancient. Some of them are ancient and historical. If they are world heritage, the idea is that we all own them, but that doesn't. You know, that doesn't seem to. You know, we've wronged everyone by. You could say we've wronged everyone by destroying that object of cultural heritage because it's world heritage. But I mean that sounds. There's something funny going on there when actually it could be, you know, it could be in a certain place or a certain people, attached to a certain people, but still it's not their property as such. There's a question there about whose property is it property at all, who owns it, who has claims on it, and so on.
Now this is a massive project, and as we've seen, there are some formidable partners involved with it. And interesting as these are conceptually, practically, this is all about ultimately shaping policy.
Well, it is shaping. I mean, I'm kind of I hesitant in saying whether the project is ultimately about any one thing. It certainly is about that, yeah, and it certainly is feeding into that, which is a very, I think, interesting thing. But I mean, what's also interesting is the big areas of philosophy it seems to bring together. So just look at the partners. I mean, the partners that got the project going, the principal investigators, as we call them. One is Derek. Now, his background is in aesthetics. That's a philosophy of art and literature and of beauty and of, you know, why do we value things? What makes something aesthetic value and what doesn't? So his expertise comes in that way. And the other partner is a woman called Helen Froh, who has worked extensively on just war theory, like when acts of war are or are not justified and which. So it's really interesting, I think, that this is two apparently quite different areas of research that come together to answer these questions, and they're really pertinent because of this adoption of the Hague Convention.
And in terms of what the outputs are, they're aiming to sort of create some writing, aren't they? They want a monograph and an edited collection.
That's right. Yeah, quite a lot by the sounds of it. A monograph between the two people I just mentioned. It's a sort of their own work, a collection of people's other works with several articles that would, you know, advance the arguments on this stuff. And looking at the other activities, quite a lot actually, I think they're working hard, a lot of conferences, bringing together all these sort of different people that work on this, not just academics, but people from the other agencies involved, which, as you say, I think lead to actual shaping policies or implementing that. The working group in the British Army, for example, it's going to actually inform that, which is quite, I think it's quite exciting. I think for someone who works on aesthetics, it's actually telling the British Army what they might do is really, I think that's just amazing. But,
just goes to show what you can do with a philosophy degree.
Yes, I suppose.
Well, Sean, thank you so much for coming and filling us in. That's been really, really fascinating. It's a brilliant project, and some big questions there as well. Yeah. Right, well, that ends today's programme of events. We've had a really, really interesting discussion across a range of topics. HJ and Damon, how are you both, and how is everyone at home?
We're having a really interesting discussion, aren't we, about heritage and how do we decide if something has heritage as well, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of moved on to when do you preserve war damage, and when does war damage become part of the heritage of a building, for example. So the Victoria and Albert Museum is preserving its war damage and actively maintaining it. So yeah, and the balance between human life and property, the value of property and the value of cultural heritage. Some interesting technological solutions have been suggested, like using drones to shoot snipers who might be hiding in a heritagely important building, or using gas. So it's sort of panning back to the technological session as well.
Mm-hmm. But I think overall, as with this session today, we've had some fantastic discussions on belonging and inequality and how we feel as part of different communities, and it's been great chatting to everyone. We've had a good time as always. What we always say is in the chat is sometimes we can miss things, or if you're like me, you're thinking about things late at night and want to let us know, just email us, studenthub@open.ac.uk, and we'd love to get back to you. Remember to keep in touch as well. You can do with that email address if you have any suggestions, or our Twitter as well, @StudentHubLive, and I'm sure we'll be excited for more great discussions in our next event as well.
Well, thank you so much, Damon and HJ. That's been wonderful. You've really held the chat together, and I know there have been some fascinating conversations going on there. I hope that you've enjoyed the event. It will be available on Catch Up, and you can also watch many other events that we've done, both for the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, as well as the Open University more generally, on the Student Hub Live YouTube channel. So do subscribe to that if you haven't already. We've got other events coming up as well that you can find out about on the Student Hub Live website. This week we've got an Adobe Connect session, which is a study skill session, and our next big event is an Advocating Classical Studies event on the 1st of April, so I hope that you can tune in for that as well. All of this is available on the Catch Up very soon after the event, but I'd like to thank everybody who's come into the studio today to talk about the various aspects of research that they've done. We're now going to show some videos. So firstly, what we're going to do is show you one of the FASS chats, which is the one that Sean was talking about a little bit earlier. And this links to the Heritage in War discussion. So that is going to be played next. We're going to hear in that session from 3 academics, and the FASS chats are discussions that cover a range of different topics in the cellar bar here at the Open University. We're then going to watch a couple of videos, one from our psychologist discussing the impact of selfies on our psychological well-being, and then Professor Gillian Rose will tell us about a research project that she's leading on smart cities. So what is a smart city, and how can cities benefit from being smart? And finally, we'll hear from Angeliki Limperumu, who is an art historian and archaeologist, and she'll be telling us why she likens herself to Indiana Jones while she's undertaking her research. But that's all from us here in the live session today. Enjoy the rest of the video programmes and the chat, and we hope to see you at an event soon. Bye for now.